Paul Potts stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage in 2007. The world saw a timid man with shaky hands and a nervous smile. But the moment he opened his mouth and began to sing Nessun Dorma, everything changed. His voice didn't just fill the theater, it stunned an entire generation. Overnight, Paul went from a struggling mobile phone salesman to a global sensation. His victory became one of the most iconic moments in reality TV history. But what fans didn't know then, and what many still don't realize now, is that Paul's story didn't follow the fairy tale path everyone expected. Behind the applause, the platinum albums, and the glowing headlines, there was a darker truth quietly unfolding. As the years passed, Paul's rise to fame turned into a battle for survival emotionally, physically, and financially. The fame that once felt like a blessing quickly became a burden he struggled to carry. Health scares, career setbacks, false rumors, and overwhelming pressure pushed him into some of the hardest years of his life. Fans wondered why he disappeared from the spotlight, why his voice sounded different, and why he rarely spoke about what came after his historic win. Only now, after years of silence, the truth about Paul Potts is finally coming to light. What he has endured and what he has managed to overcome proves his journey is far more heartbreaking, complicated, and inspiring than the world ever imagined. This is the real story behind Britain's Got Talent's first champion, and what really happened to Paul Potts after the cameras stopped rolling. Paul Potts' journey to global recognition didn't begin with fame. It began with years of insecurity, financial struggle, and a lifelong battle to believe he was worthy of the talent he carried. Long before Britain's Got Talent turned him into an overnight sensation, Paul lived a life marked by quiet resilience. Growing up in Bristol, he wasn't the confident performer audiences later celebrated. He was a shy, sensitive child who often found himself the target of bullying. His classmates mocked his appearance, his voice, and his gentle nature, planting seeds of self-doubt that stayed with him well into adulthood. Singing became his escape, the one place where he felt free, even if he rarely admitted that dream to anyone. By his 20s, Paul's love for opera had deepened, but the dream of becoming a professional singer felt impossibly far away. Money was tight, opportunities were scarce, and every attempt to chase his passion pushed him deeper into financial uncertainty. He worked odd jobs to keep himself afloat: supermarket shelves, customer service counters, and eventually a mobile phone store. Each job helped him survive, but it also reminded him how far he was from the life he envisioned. Twice, he saved enough to attend short opera training programs abroad, but each time he returned home, he found himself right back where he started. Then came the accident that nearly ended everything. Before his Britain's Got Talent audition, Paul suffered a serious cycling injury that left him with multiple broken bones, followed by a benign tumor on his throat, the very place no singer wants. Complications, surgery, and recovery drained him financially and emotionally. Doctors told him to take it slow, to rest, but Paul could feel time slipping away. He wondered if singing professionally was nothing more than a distant fantasy that he needed to abandon. Yet despite everything, the bullying, the financial burden, the injuries, Paul never truly let go. Something inside him kept whispering that he had one more chance left, though he didn't know what it would be. Then, in 2007, a new opportunity emerged, a talent show that promised ordinary people the chance to change their lives overnight. Britain's Got Talent was new, unpredictable, and untested, and Paul hesitated. What if he failed? What if the judges laughed at him? What if the world saw the insecurity he had spent years trying to hide? But with encouragement from his wife, Julianne, Paul decided to take the risk. He stepped on stage carrying not just the weight of his dreams, but the weight of every hardship he had endured. His suit didn't fit perfectly. His voice trembled from nerves, and the audience remained unsure of what to expect. Even the judges seemed skeptical. Then the music started, and in that moment, just a few seconds after Nessun Dorma left his lips, the room changed. The audience fell silent, the judges' expressions shifted, and history was made. Paul had finally been heard. That performance launched him into a world he never imagined: headlines across the globe, a record deal, international tours, and millions of fans. But while the world celebrated, Paul quietly carried the scars of everything he had been through, and those scars would soon shape the next, much more difficult chapter of his life. Winning Britain's Got Talent should have been the beginning of a smooth, successful chapter in Paul Potts' life, but the truth is far more complicated. Fame arrived instantly and overwhelmingly, and while millions celebrated him as the unlikely hero of the show, Paul soon realized that success brought an entirely new set of struggles. Overnight, he went from a quiet, private man to an international sensation, expected to perform at the highest level every single time. For someone who had spent most of his life doubting his worth, that pressure was crushing. Instead of enjoying his victory, Paul found himself wrestling with anxiety, imposter syndrome, and the fear that audiences would discover he wasn't as extraordinary as they believed. His debut album became a massive hit, topping charts in multiple countries. But with that success came relentless expectations. Managers, producers, and promoters wanted more, bigger shows, larger crowds, faster releases. Paul was pushed into a whirlwind schedule that left him exhausted, both physically and mentally. Interviews, photo shoots, rehearsals, and back-to-back flights became his new reality, and the quiet life he once lived was gone almost instantly. Even during the peak of his popularity, Paul often felt like a stranger in his own world, overwhelmed by voices telling him how he should look, act, sing, and even speak. But what fans never knew was that Paul's health began suffering almost immediately after his win. The surgery he had undergone years earlier had left lingering complications. Singing night after night strained his voice in ways that kept him constantly worried, and the physical toll of touring added to his anxiety. People assumed he was living a dream, while behind the scenes he endured sleepless nights, chronic stress, and moments where he questioned whether his body could keep up with the demands of fame. Then came the rumors, hurtful, frustrating, and often wildly exaggerated. Some critics accused him of faking insecurity for sympathy votes. Others claimed he was already trained and therefore didn't deserve to win the show. These rumors caused emotional wounds far deeper than he ever admitted. After years of battling self-doubt, hearing people say he wasn't deserving felt like a direct attack on everything he had worked for. His confidence, already fragile, took another hit. Financial pressure also followed. With fame came new responsibilities, new costs, and new expectations. People assumed Paul was suddenly wealthy, but the reality was very different. Much of his income went toward management, taxes, travel, production, and everything required to maintain a global career. He wanted to provide a stable life for his wife, but the fear of losing everything haunted him. He had grown up with very little, and the thought of returning to financial struggle fueled his anxiety even more. Despite everything, Paul pushed forward. He continued recording albums, performing in new countries, and sharing his voice with millions. But what fans didn't see was the toll it took behind the scenes. He fought through exhaustion, ignored pain, and kept smiling even when his heart felt heavy. He didn't want to disappoint the people who had believed in him. Yet, as the years passed, something inside him began to wear down. The industry that had lifted him up started to feel like a weight he could no longer carry alone. This was the beginning of Paul's slow, painful retreat from the spotlight, a retreat that left fans wondering what really happened to the man who once stunned the world. As the years moved forward, Paul Potts began quietly slipping out of the spotlight, not because he wanted to disappear, but because his body and mind desperately needed rest. The exhaustion he had been hiding for so long finally caught up with him. His voice, once the instrument that carried him to worldwide fame, became increasingly difficult to manage. Performances that once felt natural now required intense preparation, vocal therapy, and long recovery periods. And with every new strain, Paul feared the worst, that the world would one day realize he was no longer able to sing the way he once did. Behind the scenes, he dealt with a string of health concerns that further complicated his career. The lingering effects of his throat tumor and previous injuries continued to haunt him. Doctors warned him repeatedly that pushing himself too hard could lead to permanent damage. These warnings became more urgent with time, forcing Paul to cancel shows, postpone tours, and even step back from commitments he had already announced. Each time he pulled out of a performance, He was met with confusion from fans and criticism from the media. No one understood the true weight of what he was going through, and Paul felt increasingly isolated. Emotionally, the pressure took an even heavier toll. Being thrust from obscurity into international fame had been an overwhelming experience, but fading from the spotlight proved just as difficult. The same global audience that once adored him now questioned his absence. Social media, which had once celebrated him, became a source of anxiety. Every comment, every unanswered expectation, every comparison to younger singers chipped away at his confidence. Paul felt trapped between two extremes: too famous to disappear completely, yet too exhausted to maintain the demanding pace of stardom. Financial uncertainty added another layer of stress. The illusion of celebrity wealth masked the reality that income in the music industry is often unpredictable, especially for artists who don't constantly release new music or perform full-time. Paul had always lived modestly, but stepping away from the spotlight meant stepping away from steady income. He and Julianne had to make difficult decisions, cutting back on expenses, adjusting their lifestyle, and quietly accepting that the life they once envisioned might not unfold the way they hoped. Or still, through every challenge, his wife remained his strongest supporter. Julianne witnessed the highs and lows of his career more closely than anyone. She saw the emotional breakdowns, the quiet moments of fear, and the nights when he wondered whether he had let the world down. She reminded him that his worth wasn't measured by the volume of applause or the number of ticket sales. It was measured by the sincerity of his voice and the impact he had on people's hearts. Her unwavering support became the foundation he leaned on when everything else felt unstable. In this period of transition, Paul explored new paths, hoping to rebuild his confidence and find meaning outside the relentless pressure of fame. He tried composing new songs, experimented with different musical styles, and even considered stepping away from music altogether. But each time he thought about leaving it behind, he felt a deep sense of unfinished purpose. Singing had been his escape since childhood. It was the one constant in his life. Walking away from it entirely felt like losing a part of himself. As Paul navigated this difficult phase, one question lingered: would he ever return to the heights of fame he once reached? Or would his story become another cautionary tale of overnight success, followed by quiet disappearance? The truth, as the reveals, is much more emotional than fans ever realized. In time, Paul Potts began to understand that his journey wasn't meant to mirror the glamorous careers of other performers. His path was different from the star, unpredictable and deeply human. And instead of bending himself to fit the expectations of fame, he started rebuilding a life that felt authentic and emotionally sustainable. This shift did not happen overnight. It took years of reflection, countless difficult conversations, and painful acceptance of the limits his health and energy had placed on him. But slowly, Paul began reclaiming his voice not only as a singer, but as a person who had survived far more than the public ever knew. One of the most important changes came when Paul stopped measuring his worth through industry standards. He no longer cared about topping charts or headlining major tours. Instead, he focused on performing in environments that allowed him to connect with audiences on a deeper, more personal level. Smaller venues replaced massive arenas, intimate shows replaced demanding world tours, and his music once again became an expression of emotion rather than obligation. For the first time since his BGT victory, Paul felt free to sing without pressure. He also became more open about his struggles. In interviews, he started sharing pieces of the truth he had once kept hidden: the injuries that nearly derailed his career, the self-doubt that lingered long after success, the emotional exhaustion of fame, and his ongoing health challenges. Fans responded with overwhelming compassion, reminding him that his story mattered not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Through this honesty, Paul discovered that vulnerability could be a strength rather than a weakness, and his connection with audiences grew stronger than ever. Another major transformation happened in his personal life. Paul and Julianne focused on strengthening their marriage, ensuring that their relationship remained a source of comfort rather than stress. They moved toward a quieter, more grounded lifestyle, prioritizing peace and stability over fame. Nature walks, home-cooked meals, and long conversations replaced the chaos of airports and constant schedules. The shift reminded Paul of the simple joys he had almost lost along the way, and it helped him rebuild the inner calm he so desperately needed. With this new mindset, Paul began exploring creative avenues he had long ignored. He revisited music composition, collaborated with smaller orchestras, and considered mentoring young singers who lacked confidence just as he had years ago. He also embraced charity work, using his name and story to support causes related to mental health, music education, and anti-bullying. These efforts gave him a sense of purpose that no award or chart, position ever could, but perhaps the most unexpected outcome of Paul's transformation is that his voice, despite everything he has endured, remains a powerful instrument. It may not sound exactly as it did in 2007, and he no longer pushes it to its limits, but the emotional depth in his singing has only grown richer. Audiences who attend his performances today often describe them as more sincere, more intimate, and more moving than ever before. Paul's voice now carries the weight of his life experience: pain, resilience, gratitude, and hope. So what really happened to Paul Potts? The world expected a fairy tale ending after his Britain's Got Talent victory, but life led him down a much more complex road. He faced crushing pressure, painful injuries, emotional burnout, and public misunderstanding. Yet, despite all of it, Paul didn't break. Instead, he transformed. He stepped away, healed, rebuilt himself, and found a deeper meaning in his music and his life for today. Paul Potts may not be the global superstar he once was, but he is something far more meaningful: a survivor who found peace, a performer who sings from the heart, and a reminder that real success isn't measured in fame, but in the courage to keep going when the world expects you to fall.